The ceiling fan sputtered once, groaned, and gave out completely. The sudden stillness made the humid air feel suffocating. I stood in the middle of my apartment, shirt clinging to my back, staring up at the lifeless blade. Just my luck. I could have called maintenance, but that would take days. I could have asked my boyfriend, Mark, but he'd scoff at the idea of handling tools himself. Mark was practical in every way but mechanical. He had a way of avoiding inconvenience, a trait I used to admire. Now it felt more like detachment. So I dialed the one person I shouldn't have, Jake. "Fan stopped working," I said when he picked up. "Think you could come over and take a look?" A pause. I could picture him rubbing his jaw, debating. "You know I'm not an electrician, right? You're a mechanic." "That's close enough." Another pause. Then a resigned sigh. "Be there in 20. I exhaled. This was a bad idea. Jake had been my stepbrother for 7 years, but we'd never fallen into any traditional sibling dynamic. He was my father's wife's son, no shared blood, no history before our parents' marriage. Just an uncomfortable coexistence that never softened into something familial. He was taller than me, broader, built like someone who worked with his hands every day. While I pursued design and marketing, he spent his days in grease-streaked overalls, fixing engines and rebuilding machines. We lived in different worlds, but the one thing that connected us was an unspoken tension neither of us ever addressed. Jake was straight. I was not. And yet, there had always been something electric in the air between us. By the time he knocked, I had convinced myself this was just a casual favor. Nothing more. When I opened the door, the late summer heat followed him inside. He wore a fitted black t-shirt, slightly damp at the collar, and jeans that looked like they'd seen years of labor. He smelled like oil and something unmistakably him. His eyes flickered over me, quick but assessing. "Still wearing those tiny shorts, huh?" I smirked. "You act like you don't love them." Jake snorted, stepping past me. "Where's the damn fan?" I led him to the bedroom. He glanced around, taking in the carefully arranged space, the neatly made bed, the photos on the nightstand, one of me and Mark at a dinner party, frozen in a moment that looked happier than it felt. Jake said nothing. Instead, he pulled a small toolbox from his bag and got to work. I sat on the bed, watching as he reached up, muscles shifting beneath his shirt. I knew this was wrong, knew that the way I looked at him had always been a quiet betrayal of reason and restraint. But he made it so damn hard not to. After a few minutes, he grunted. "This thing's old as hell. You should replace it." "With what budget?" Jake smirked, the corner of his mouth lifting just enough to make something in my stomach tighten. "Mark doesn't pitch in?" I shrugged, looking away. "Mark's not really the fix things around the house type." He made a sound, something between a laugh and a scoff. "Figures." The weight of those words sat between us, heavy and full of things unsaid. I watched as he wiped the sweat from his forehead, then peeled off his shirt, tossing it onto my bed like it belonged there. I should have looked away. But I didn't. Jake caught me staring. Held my gaze. Didn't move. I swallowed. The heat in the room had nothing to do with the broken fan anymore. The air between us was charged, buzzing like a live wire. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then, as if sensing the shift between us, he looked back up at the fan. "Almost done." The spell broke, but the damage had been done. I lay back on the bed, arms crossed behind my head, feigning nonchalance. "How's life?" He exhaled, continuing to work. "Same as always. Work, sleep, repeat." "No girlfriend?" He gave me a look. "No time." I hummed, closing my eyes. "You always make time for what you really want." Jake didn't respond. I felt the mattress dip slightly, heard the rustle of fabric as he shifted his weight. When I opened my eyes, he was closer than before, adjusting his grip on the fan. Close enough that I could see the faint scar on his collarbone, the fine layer of sweat on his skin. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, he cleared his throat, stepping back. "Done." I exhaled, sitting up. The fan whirred to life above us, sending a much-needed breeze through the thick air. "Guess I owe you," I said, voice steadier than I felt. Jake picked up his shirt, but didn't put it back on. "You don't owe me anything." I watched him, the way his fingers clenched around the fabric. There was something in his posture, a hesitation, a question neither of us had the courage to voice. He turned for the door. "I should go." I nodded, though I didn't want him to. "Yeah." As he walked away, I wondered if he felt it too. That shift. That moment when something unspoken had finally dared to surface. The fan spun overhead, but the air had never felt so thick. The sound of the door closing should have been the end of it. But the moment Jake left, the room felt hollow, as if something unfinished lingered in the air between the spinning blades and the thick, humid night. I sat on the edge of the bed, my fingers pressed into the mattress where he had stood moments before. The scent of his skin, faintly metallic, a trace of sweat and something else, still clung to the space he'd occupied. My chest was tight, my thoughts racing in directions I shouldn't allow. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Jake. "Forgot my wrench." My pulse spiked. I stared at the words, knowing full well that was a flimsy excuse. He never forgot his tools. Ever. I typed back. "Doors open." Seconds later, the knob turned, and there he was again, standing in the dim light, eyes darker than before. A different kind of tension hummed between us now, a pull neither of us tried to ignore. Jake stepped inside, closing the door behind him. And this time, neither of us looked away. Jake's hand hesitated on the door handle, his muscles tense, as if some internal war raged inside him. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, in one swift motion, he let go and turned back toward me. I didn't know who moved first. Maybe it was him, maybe it was me. But suddenly, the space between us disappeared. The air, thick with unspoken words, combusted in a single reckless decision. Jake's hands found my waist, rough fingers curling against my skin. My pulse slammed against my ribs. I should have stopped him. Should have said something. But I didn't. His lips hovered near mine. Not touching. Not yet. His breath was ragged, his body tense. This was a line neither of us could uncross. "You sure about this?" he murmured. "No," my voice was barely above a whisper. "But I don't care." His control shattered. The door clicked shut, sealing us in together. The room was thick with tension, the weight of our last encounter hanging between us like an impending storm. Jake stood near the door, fingers twitching at his sides. He looked like a man at war with himself, torn between what he wanted and what he knew was wrong. I wasn't faring any better. My body still remembered his touch, the way his lips had claimed mine without hesitation. The craving hadn't faded. If anything, it had intensified. "This is a mistake," he said, voice rough, but he didn't move away. I exhaled, stepping toward him. "Then why are you here?" Jake's jaw tensed. "Because I can't stop thinking about it." His admission sent a shiver through me. Neither could I. We stood there, two men locked in a silent battle, fighting a pull we both knew would destroy something. Him, his sense of morality. Me, my relationship with Mark. The thought of Mark sent a wave of guilt crashing over me. I turned away, running a hand through my hair. "This isn't just about us, Jake." "I know," he said, voice tight. "But that doesn't change anything." I faced him again. His eyes were dark, burning with something he wouldn't name. He had always been the reckless one, the one who acted first and thought later. And yet, right now, he was hesitating. He needed me to make the call. I swallowed hard. Then we stopped. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Jake let out a slow breath, then nodded. "All right." But the pain in his eyes betrayed him. The following days were unbearable. I told myself we had done the right thing, that walking away had been the only choice. But my body didn't believe it. Neither did my heart. Mark noticed something was off. "You've been distant lately," he said one evening over dinner. I forced a smile. "Just work stress." He reached across the table, squeezing my hand. You know you can talk to me, right? Guilt twisted in my gut. If only he knew. I know, I lied. 1 week later, Jake called. I almost didn't answer. But my fingers betrayed me, swiping across the screen before I could stop myself. Hey. My voice was steadier than I expected. Jake hesitated on the other end. I need to see you. I closed my eyes. Jake. Just one last time. I should have said no. Should have ended it right there. But instead, I whispered, come over. The second he walked through my door, I knew this was the end. The final mistake we would make. Jake didn't waste time. He grabbed me, pulled me close, and kissed me like he was memorizing the taste of regret. It was desperate, consuming. The last moment before the fall. And when it was over, when the haze of lust faded, reality hit like a freight train. Jake sat on the edge of my bed, head in his hands. This is fucked up. I exhaled sharply. Yeah. Silence stretched between us, but this time, it wasn't heavy with longing. It was finality. Jake stood, pulling on his shirt. I can't keep doing this. I nodded, throat tight. Neither can I. He looked at me then, something raw in his gaze. Do you love him? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Did I? I wanted to say yes. Wanted to believe it. But the hesitation in my silence was enough of an answer. Jake nodded, as if he had expected that. Then you need to decide what you really want. And just like that, he walked away. Mark came home that evening, oblivious to the war raging inside me. He kissed me, told me about his day, curled up beside me like nothing had changed. But everything had. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling fan that started all of this, I knew the truth. I had to choose. Stay with Mark, pretend this never happened, force myself into a love that felt more like comfort than passion. Or face the truth, that what I felt for Jake wasn't just lust. It was something deeper. Something dangerous. The ceiling fan spun lazily above me, a quiet reminder that sometimes things break. And sometimes,